MMA Plus here, post-event at KSW 32, Road to Wembley. Andreas Georgiou now joined Roberto Reid. Roberto, first of all, what a show here at Wembley Arena for KSW.
I think a new standard has been set for MMA in the UK. This was the best event that we've seen in the UK in a very long time. You know, if I'm honest, I think this is going to redefine people's perceptions of how MMA shows should be ran and should be produced. The production was on point. Everything was on point. I think it was a great night for MMA in the UK.
I mean, we could probably forget that we're here in London, England, because that partisan Polish crowd out there at the Wembley Arena was absolutely fantastic, deafening at times. Has that kind of set a new standard of, like, you know, we always talk about the Dublin crowd and Conor McGregor, but, you know, this Polish crowd here at KSW just rocked the boat.
They definitely are on a par with the Irish. You know, before Dublin 2014, I always said the best event I'd been to, ironically enough, was in Croatia, and it was a kickboxing bout. 20,000 Croats chanting Mirko Cro Cop's name. Tonight has kind of redefined that for me. We're not even in Poland, but we were in Poland tonight. It was an amazing atmosphere. I
mean, let's touch on, you know, Team England as they did tonight. Not a good start. Andre Winner dropping the decision to Krakowski. You know, not the way that the English fighters would have wanted to start it. But, you know, we improved, albeit slowly. Ollie Thompson, he won a DQ victory, you know, tonight over Michael Vlodarek. You know, not the win that Ollie Thompson would have wanted, but a win nonetheless. You know, we spoke to him post-fight. He was happy with his performance. Was that what they needed to get the ball rolling?
I think so. I think Jim Warhead would have stepped up to the plate anyway, but it was good to kind of get the Brits off to a winning start. Yeah. Sooner rather than later. You know, I was convinced that Jim Warhead would be the Brit to do the business for us tonight, and he was. Yeah. You know, once he got going, he dispatched his opponent pretty quickly. But, you know, it was great to get a win on the board earlier in the night.
Obviously, you know, Ollie Thompson, you know, he looked good to start with against Vlodarek. You know, Vlodarek looked very good in the second round with his grappling. Third round, it was a bit iffy, and that knee to the head of the grounded opponent in Ollie Thompson, you know, he couldn't carry on, so it was a DQ victory. But as you mentioned, Jim Warhead got the business done, second round TKO over Rafael Mox. Spoke to him pre-fight, and, you know, he was talking that he was going to come out here and be emphatic. And, you know, he was. It was some very good finishing with the strikes. For him, what do you think now? Jim Warhead, we're calling him an icon. You know, what's next for him here in UK MMA? Because, you know, he doesn't want to sign multi-fight deals, but there's a lot of promotions after him.
I think, you know, he may continue the trend of maybe competing overseas. You know, he seems to be dipping his feet in a lot of international waters. I know we're in London tonight, but it is a European promotion. I think we could see him maybe compete on the continent some more, you know. He's been back in the UK. I know it was a year between this fight and his last fight in the UK, but I think we could see him, you know, seeing a bit of the world more, you know. Oh, you never know. He could end up back in the UK. You never know.
And just lastly for Team England, James Mc Sweeney getting the victory against, you know, a very, very tough opponent in Rozalski. He got that first round rear naked choke victory. Mc Sweeney very happy, you know, does his camp now in Thailand. For him, he's looking, you know, he's talking about being in the best shape of his career. Got a lot of things on the horizon, an Asian promotion he's signing with. So, you know, that news still to come. For James Mc Sweeney to round the night off 3-1 for Team England, how impressive was he tonight?
I think the stars have aligned for James. You know, he seems very settled. You know, he's got his new gym. He's relocated permanently to Phuket, Thailand. You know, he got, as he said in the interview, he's got all his coaching team. He's got his Dutch, you know, Roberto Flamengo by his side. He's got his team from Brazil who are helping him out for this camp. You know, despite the distractions of opening a new gym, he seemed quite content, and it seemed like he had a perfect camp, and it showed in his performance. You know, against the odds, he put on a masterclass and got an unexpected win. You know, let's be honest. I would have said KO or TKO. He got the submission win, so it's a great night for James.
Very good victory for James Mc Sweeney. And in the main event of the evening, Mariusz Pudzianowski, the legend himself, falling short against Peter Graham, the K1 legend. You know, it looked like Pudzianowski tied out very early, and Peter Graham just ground him out after that to get the finish.
that's always going to be the case. Let's be honest with you. No disrespect to Marius, he's a legend, but not in MMA. He's a strong man, and his record cannot be faulted as a strong man. But as a mixed martial artist, we all predicted if he didn't beat Peter in the first round, he was going to struggle, and unfortunately for him, that's exactly what happened. No disrespect, he blew his load by the end of the first, and Peter just took control.
I mean, the rumours were that December, New Year's Eve, Pudzianowski probably an opponent, a possibility for Fedor Emelianenko's return. Does that look like it's going to happen now? I mean, that's another loss, but who knows? It's definitely still an option out there, especially with KSW being an affiliate promotion with, that Japanese rising.
Well, it could happen. I think it will be a popular-ish matchup if it happens, but let's be honest, I don't think that's a fight that real mixed martial arts fans would want to see. We all know what's happened. Ring rust or not, you're not going to want to see Pudzianowski against Fedor. There's only one. We're going to only be one winner in my eyes, unfortunately.
True. And to close the show out, absolutely amazing atmosphere here at Wembley Arena. Has this set now a new precedent of what UK MMA promotions have to kind of do to match what Europe's number one in KSW have done coming over here to London?
I'll probably get a lot of heat for this, but I told you so. I've been saying this for 3 or 4 years. We've been blessed enough to travel, the breadth and width of the continent and beyond. So we've seen shows outside of the UK. We always knew that this was going to set the standard and raise the bar. No disrespect to other promotions, we love you, but it's not. You're not in the same league as KSW in terms of the fans they pull in, the quality of their production and so forth. The fights, we can get. Yes, we have as good as fight on UK cards and beyond, but in terms of the all-round attraction, KSW have set a new standard in the UK. I'm sorry, they really have.
People are talking about the UFC London card, worried, who's going to be put on that. If we look at the Polish support tonight, could, if she gets past Valerie Letourneau at UFC 193, UFC strawweight champion, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, could she be an option for the UFC London card next year? Because if, the Polish fans turn out like they did tonight, it's going to be a big show.
Well, we've got a growing Polish population in the UK and in London in particular. If tonight's a barometer for what would happen if Joanna was on the card, it would be the smart move. Even if she is not English, that was ridiculous what we saw this evening, and the Polish would definitely represent their UFC champion on that card.
It would be exciting to see that, and I think Joanna Jędrzejczyk would love to fight over in UFC London. We'll have to ask her that herself after she fights Valerie Letourneau. But from MMA Plus, from Roberto Reid and from Andreas Georgiou here at KSW 32 Road to Wembley, thank you for watching, and make sure to check out tons of post-fight content from here at KSW. Good night.